I'm Will Reuter, and this is HBA After Hours, a podcast from the Home Builders Association of Greater Kansas City. Hello, Kansas City. My name is Will Reuter. I'm the Executive Vice President at the Home Builders Association of Greater Kansas City. That is a mouthful, so you can call me Will. And I am joined by Jen Bertrand, my co-host on this.
Hello, everyone.
Well, we want to just, communicate with the broader Kansas City public about all of the things that it takes to make housing happen in Kansas City. It's incredibly complex, and there's a lot of frustration that exists out there in the would-be home buying community. So we thought we'd do a service to the public and just bring in some experts from around the metro who have devoted their lives to putting roofs over their neighbors' heads. And so with that, why don't we go ahead and jump into what it is this podcast is ultimately going to be about. At the end of the day, housing is about supply. Is there enough of it where it needs to be and at a price more people can afford to pay? Is it going to satisfy their needs? Is it going to check all of their boxes? Home buyers are like fingerprints. Every single one of them is different in some way, shape, or form. And so as an industry, as a community, we've got to determine that right mix of how to deliver housing product at the volume and velocity that the market is calling for. And there is an infinite number of variables that come into making that happen. So in order to make this a little bit more accessible, in order to make the whole home buying, where does this house come from? It was a field 2 years ago, and now it's a neighborhood, and there's kids riding their bikes down it. How does that happen? And so as we look to explain some of these complex topics in terms that people can understand, really the only way to do that in a fulsome and honest way is to bring the people that have devoted their professional and personal lives to, again, putting roofs over the people's heads of Kansas City, both past, present, and future. So with that, I think we should bring in one of those experts that I alluded to.
Yes, go ahead and introduce yourself, Brenner Holland, because I have your resume in front of me and it just says how awesome you are. But if you were to give some highlights to someone, the elevator speech of who you are and what you do, what would you tell them?
Great. Well, first of all, thanks, Will and Jen, for having me. This is fun. Really glad to be on the inaugural podcast for the HBA here. That's really an honor. So again, Brenner Holland, I'm Senior Vice President with Hunt Midwest. Really a lifelong Kansas City, and I grew up, Will referred to it as almost Oklahoma. The other day, 183rd and Quivira area, to a family that was in the construction business. My grandfather started a construction business in Lenexa, Kansas, back in the 1950s, and I grew up doing, odd jobs with that all throughout, which really, you don't know it as a kid, but everything you're doing, you're learning to make the decisions that you make as an adult. Luckily for me, being in that construction business, I got to be on land survey crews and rake asphalt and do some of those things that are that I see done every day in our business today. Really glad to be here. I spent a lot of time with in that construction company, and then with my dad in a civil engineering firm. Moved to Arizona for about 6 years and ran a civil engineering office for him out there. And then came back to Kansas City, and I had been watching Hunt Midwest for a number of years. Really liked the things they were doing. Obviously, being owned by the Lamar Hunt family, there's some prestige there that really paid attention to for a long time. And a position opened up. I interviewed with Ora Reynolds, who had my position now at the time, and she's our CEO and president, and I think you both know her pretty well. She's really a dynamic leader.
She's a firecracker.
She is, and she just keeps getting better every day. So was able to land a job with Hunt Midwest, and I've been there now 20 years. So and really running some aspect of the residential division that whole time, which includes the single-family master plan developments that we're going to talk mostly about today, but also our multifamily and senior housing components.
See, and I hear all of that as the average human listening to this, and I'm in the industry, you go, wow, that's some grown-up talk right there, and amazing what you do, and I love your story with your granddad. But I would want to know, what are the common misconceptions that you find the average person in our area doesn't know about what you guys are doing or what you're striving to do, or even how you choose those areas to start developing?
Yeah, that's a great question. We deal in land, and land is not something we generally make more of. I say that we generally don't make more of it. Our industrial group mines out underground in Kansas City and creates square footage underground. So we do create other square footage in town at times, but for the most part, you have to be opportunistic to find that land. And we spend a lot of time. We're branded at Hunt Midwest with 3 words, and that's relationships, resources, and reputation. And those resources and relationships really play into the land side, in that you're watching this land, and over time, families transition into a point where they make that land available. And we like to work on larger projects. So we're not a developer that's going to come in and buy 5 or 10 acres. We like to buy the 100, 200, 300 acres where we can really sink our teeth into and make a community out of it. And so those don't come along very often. And when they do come along, you have to be in a position to have the resources to purchase the property, have a landowner trust your reputation that you're going to be able to deliver a quality community, and that they want to have their be associated with that, have their name with it, and then also be able to properly do what needs to be done to develop that property.
Yeah, it's just kind of the Kansas City way. You want to be a good neighbor. And when you're creating neighborhoods, it has to have a flow and it has to make sense because, Hunt Midwest is a local company. You guys have been here a long time. You're going to be here a long time. The majority of your human capital is here in Kansas City. You have to look people in the eye and do the right thing. And, that's got to be, a challenge a lot of times because the word developer is sometimes used as a pejorative out in the community, whereas it really is, a devotion from a professional standpoint to creating a sense of place for future Kansas Cityans and creating, that plot of land that went from, a horse farm or a crop farm into a neighborhood where future generations of Kansas Cityans are gonna grow up.
Well, that's one of the best parts about the job is over time is going back to those neighborhoods that you started 20 years ago and seeing the trees grow up, seeing that second generation of families with the young kids at the pools, and it is a business where you see those things happen, and you get the you get the satisfaction of watching that develop over time. So, but you're right, developers. It's kind of a nasty word sometimes, but the majority of developers in Kansas City and the majority of home builders who buy lots from us and build houses are relatively small groups that are working every day to do the best they can to deliver this product to the public. So.
Communities are oftentimes best built by the people who live in them. And that's just been one of the really cool and unique things about the Kansas City Metro is that these important products, these houses, these apartments, whatever it is that where someone sleeps at night is being built by the people that they see out around in the community every day. So seeing that community consistently reinvest in itself, there's got to be some, emotional tie or personal, satisfaction that you gain from being able to participate in that and see this community you grew up in, flourish.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most satisfying things too is seeing some of these people that move multiple times within a community. They might start out in a lower priced townhome, a duplex or a triplex or something, move up to the next level of housing, and then maybe buy a villa that when they're in their 60s or 70s and they live out their life in a master down, primary suite down type product. So people staying in a community for 2 or 3 moves is really something we love to see.
If someone was listening to this and they're like, this all sounds amazing, but how do I know which areas are the right areas to move forward towards, or what neighborhoods, what do they look for? How do they know that's a good choice for their family? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, that's a great question. We like to buy properties in growing areas, and we try to look to see, is the, are the governing agencies, the jurisdictions that are running that area where the property is, are they looking forward for growth? Are they doing the things that are going to drive people for a long period of time? And that's not only creating housing, but it's creating jobs, it's creating opportunities, it's creating amenities like the public parks and the ball fields that go in. And then really a big driver for us, and still, even if you don't have kids, but is the school district. there's nothing that protects property values like the school district. And for many years in Kansas City, that's been, Blue Valley and Shawnee Mission. But I think if you look to the Northland and look to Lee Summit, there's some great school districts all around this metro. And so if you really, housing, I say, ends up being a good investment for people, but you really have to make that decision based on where you are in your life at the time. And if you, but if you want to protect your property values, look to these good school districts first.
I'll be looking where I'm out of shape, tired, old. I'm just kidding.
Well, so many people, they look out and they see this green pasture land, and that may be interesting for most people. How does someone engaged in your industry, in the land development industry, what starts running through your mind when you go walk a piece of property or you're walking the acreage, and what opportunities are you identifying? What challenges are you seeing in some of the land that either has been developed or would be developed? What's a disqualifier to say, that's not going to make sense from a business standpoint, from a practical standpoint, it's too far out. What are some of those, items where you're making those land selections that is ultimately going to say, the vision is here and we know we can bring it to fruition?
There's a lot of things that go into that, and most people don't see. When you go to buy a house, you don't see all the horizontal aspect that goes into it. Really, the first thing is the property proximate to the proper utilities. In Kansas City, we have a lot of topography. People for years think Kansas and Missouri are flat and it's flyover country, but in our area here, we do have a lot of topography, and that topography drives sanitary sewers as much as anything. These cities don't want to have a bunch of pumping stations, and in fact, they work really hard to try to minimize those and have those only in certain places. So, the sanitary sewer works on a gravity system, and not to get too technical, but everything needs to flow downhill. And when it does that,
that was the least technical description I've ever heard of that.
Try
so that's
not
good.
to giggle.
Yeah, trying not to be too graphic there, but it all has to flow downhill, and so you try to find properties that are going to be able to connect to that sanitary sewer system, and then that also have the other utilities and infrastructure in place around them. It doesn't take much math to figure out if you go buy 300 acres at $30,000 an acre, you have a big investment into a property. So you want to limit how much you have to also install of sanitary sewer, water line, electric, those sort of things to bring to the property to make it feasible.
And there's going to be additional requirements based on the jurisdiction that you're in. You're talking about, we have to have a certain width of street. We have to have a certain amount of curbing. We've got to have a certain amount of drainage. If, as you described, that topography doesn't for stormwater doesn't necessarily is going to flow out naturally. Those things have to be maneuvered. So you really have to work with the parcel itself, and it's going to be unique in navigating those challenges. Because I think you're right. When someone is looking in a new neighborhood, an emerging neighborhood, there may not be an appreciation for how much time has been spent on site to get it to the point where you can go do a lot selection and start building a house.
Right. We like to say that a property will yield what it's going to yield, and we do spend a lot of time walking, driving the site, and then we sit down with land planners and the civil engineers to really see what needs to go in what portion of the area. Are these large single-family lots? Does it yield an area for some townhomes? Maybe there's even a front parcel that could, have some small retail, a daycare, a coffee shop, that sort of thing. And so, as you start doing that land planning, it really almost in a charrette type environment with our team and our land planners, kind of says, hey, this wants to be here, this wants to be over here, and you get the yields and the density you need to make that project work.
When I'm out in the community, a lot of times, whether I'm in front of a city council or a planning commission or at a community meeting or just out and about, there's this, kind of perception that somewhat exists. It's something that I've noticed. In that there's just this perception that, you identify a piece of property, you lay it flat as a pancake, you put asphalt over the whole thing, and you just destroy the natural environment around it. Now, me being closer to the industry than much of the broader public, I know that you, as you just described, you work with what you've got, and you incorporate a housing element into that natural environment. And the level of manipulation is going to vary based on, the parcel. But the whole point is to make sure that you are delivering home sites that are accessible and at a price that's going to keep the ultimate price point of the home within a certain range.
Right.
Because the price of the land plays an outsized role in ultimately what can be put on it.
Right. As developers, there's nothing that sells better than a house that backs up to trees. And generally, if you can protect that topography a little bit and have that house back up to trees, that's your premium lot in the community. You also need to have the interior lots that are flatter and more attainable than maybe some of those premium lots, because that was what keeps kind of the average price down in the community, and the property has that available, so you have to take that yield from that property as well. We do spend a lot of time working with the cities and counties and other jurisdictions talking about environmental issues. For years, there was really no protections, and as some of those protections started to become more prevalent, you had to turn those, what could be a negative from a cost standpoint, into a positive. And so we spend a lot of time protecting trees and protecting creeks, both because it's a jurisdictional requirement and because it sells. So what we can't do, though, is keep increasing some of those environmental regulations and some of that bureaucracy and stuff that comes with that when there's no return to the public.
Yeah.
So, and when people hear us fighting against those things, it's not that we don't believe in the environment. It's not that we don't want to have the best treed lots available. It's just that at times it gets to be no return for the public.
Yeah, and you use the word fighting to describe, what it is. And it's been my experience and my observation that it rarely ever escalates to actual fighting. It's really adding context and making sure that the expertise, that perspective, is shared and incorporated in how the community moves forward. Because, cities don't build their own housing, and Hunt Midwest doesn't own its own city. And so there has to be that partnership. And how do you overlay the needs of where it's going to be built and who's going to be doing it, and make sure that they align? Because there's a lot of shared values within those two particular important players in that transaction. The community that's going to put in some services and provide the approvals to make this significant investment to ensure that there are home ownership opportunities within their community, which of course home ownership has been demonstrated as one of, if not the only true way to build wealth available to the individual person. And so when all of those requirements come in, it does have a mitigating effect on the ability to deliver that product that we all need, right? We all need a place to sleep at night. And so, I want to make sure that the folks listening, recognize that this is an everyday occurrence where these conversations are happening. You may not see dirt moving, but there is a flurry of activity, whether it's on the site or, in City Hall or at an office, trying to work through these issues because as you described, trees and the natural environment, those are good for business. That's what people want. It makes very little sense for someone like yourself to go out and say, well, we're going to do what we want to do, and the public's just going to have to be okay with it.
Right, and the vast majority, the employees at these jurisdictions understand that as well, and they're really trying to work hand in hand to one, address the issues they might have, whether that's from a maintenance standpoint or at times there's things that we do that just don't work, and so they feel like they need to create regulation that's going to fix that. What we try to do is lend to that conversation so that they know the possible fixes or the improvements just don't cost too much money, and that we can pass those on properly to the consumer. Because as a land developer and as a builder, any cost added to a site gets passed on to the consumer. That's just the nature of the business. We, to be in the business, we have to make money, so you're going to pass those costs along. Yeah. It's a much narrower gross profit type environment than it was 10 or 15 years ago. And so every cost that gets added is really scrutinized.
Yeah, I was gonna
I'd
ask
like
you.
to jump in
absolutely.
here eventually.
Yeah.
What I would say is, and I appreciate all of that, but to the average person listening, they're going to start to fall asleep at some point. At some point, they just want to know. You guys are in a lot of places around Kansas City. You're foreshadowing where things are going. So they want to know, where all is Hunt Midwest? Where are you around Kansas City? Where are you seeing that growth? Are you in Liberty? Are you in Lee Summit? Where are you? Because that's where they want to start kind of looking towards.
Yeah, great question. Kansas City proper in the Northland is really starting to come into its own, and we're heavily invested in that area. We're creating a lot of jobs up there. Our industrial commercial group has 3,200 acres up by the airport that is driving a whole bunch of new projects, whether that's the ACE Distribution Center. We've talked about Google over on the east side. Those people that come in, the site selectors that are looking for where those mega projects are going, are also one of the big boxes they have to check is housing. And luckily in the Northland, we've got some great opportunities. The Shoal Creek area grew for the 2000s and the 2010s, and now the Twin Creeks area up there, which is kind of very proximate to downtown Kansas City, very proximate to the airport. That area is really in a growth mode right now, and it's really exciting because there's good school districts there. You can be downtown in 15 minutes. You can be at the airport in 10 minutes.
I live Weatherby Lake, so
You do.
I'm
So
like,
you,
it is awesome.
Preaching
I love
to the
it.
choir
Yes,
here, right?
yes.
Yeah. And so for many years, that's kind of been an overlooked area. But now, we were talking with our real estate agents over at Reese Nichols New Homes the other day, and 50% of the people coming in to look at housing now are coming from out of state. These are people coming in for new jobs. They're coming in because the Midwest is affordable. They're fleeing places like San Francisco and LA, Chicago, and they're looking at Kansas City. And when they come here now, they're not just immediately going out south, which there's still some really good opportunities. That Northland has really become a kind of a growth area. And then also Lee Summit, great school district, committed to growth, a lot of new ground under development there too.
Do you find that you're developing different types of houses, that the dynamic of what people are wanting has changed because it got to where it was bigger, 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 and more is more is more? Are you finding that now it's smaller, thoughtful? What are you guys seeing in what you're kind of developing?
I love that term, smaller, thoughtful. I think the trend is not necessarily that it's getting a lot smaller, but we're not increasing size and we're not increasing costs like we have in the past in a year-over-year basis. So the builders are really cognizant of, and we are when we do land development, of maybe making that lot just 5 feet less wide on the front, and then the builder is controlling the size of the home it goes in, because things are more expensive. And every time we add to the cost of a house, we drop a certain amount of people out of the market. So one of the things, again, people love about Kansas City is they can come in and find a home, that may be $700,000-800,000 in another city that's $500,000-600,000 here, and they take the equity out of those homes and move to this area. So a lot of concentration on making sure the product is right.
And even my mother asked me the other day, why aren't there smaller, less expensive homes built? It's my mother, so she got the long explanation. So we don't have time for the long explanation. But I think my mom just asked me a question so she would hear me talk for a long time. She just wanted to hear my voice. I'm almost 40 years old, and she's still my mom.
That's a good mom.
That's right. But I think there is, obviously a calculation that has to go in to it, and one of those calculations is what's allowed to be done within the jurisdiction you're looking at, because there are requirements about how that lot is oriented and the size of it and ultimately those things. So how do you navigate those between the multiple jurisdictions that Hunt Midwest is in? Because we're kind of in a patchwork here within the metro about what's allowed to be put on the ground.
Right, with 2 states and multiple counties and then multiple cities, you're absolutely right. There are a bunch of jurisdictions. I've got a great staff, and that's all we do. So, we're always paying attention to what those regulations are in different places. The base stuff that you do for a single-family lot is generally the same in all those jurisdictions, but you're right. Some places might want concrete streets versus asphalt streets. Different kinds of pipe that has to go into the ground to convey stormwater and sanitary sewer and the water lines. So you really have to be on top of the game. We also really rely on our professionals, the civil engineers and land planners that we use all the time to make sure that they're on top of that as well. But it really comes down to a good staff and good contractors who know those different areas.
So it comes down to people, just like everything else.
Well, I just want to end with the 2 big things that you guys recently are a part of now, because you guys really are knocking it out of the park. You have great leadership, you guys care, but for some people, they may not watch the news. Can you tell everyone what are the 2 big things you are part of?
Well, we have the Subtropolis, which is over on the kind of northeast side of Kansas City, and above Subtropolis, which is our underground business park. We've got a big business development over there for more industrial type uses. Google is building a data center over there, and that was a big announcement for the Northland and for Kansas City. And then up at, we call it KCI 29, just north of the airport, we have 3,200 acres that we've zoned for what's generally the term mega projects. And we've have the ACE distribution center that's going in there, and we have some other really exciting mega projects that are looking at that site too. They're going to create housing. They're going to create sustained growth for Kansas City for many years.
Well, I think all the work you guys are doing is what helps make Kansas City stay relative, and people are constantly surprised by us. You guys and Paul Rudd, I think, are really bringing it.
Well, and Brenner, those are projects that Hunt Midwest is in, but there's also all of this evidence about the investment you're making in the future workforce with what Hunt Midwest did as an early mover in supporting Northland Career Center for establishing their new facility in the Northland, and being able to invest in our future workforce where, young people are going to find opportunities in not only the trades and construction, which is sorely needed, but also healthcare and agriculture and all those kinds of things. So it's a really cool opportunity for folks to better understand that Hunt Midwest is reinvesting in the community in multiple different ways, just rather than making it bigger.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Will. And that's it's very important to us to give back. As stewards of the Lamar Hunt family name, we take that very seriously, and we spend a lot of time making sure that not only monies but the time and effort of our staff goes back into making the community better.
Well, I just want to end. I think we should always ask all our guests, the favorite thing you see happening in the home design market. So whether it's designing for Amazon packages to be delivered to your house or anything like that. Is there anything you're seeing in home design that you think is innovative, cool, next, or you just appreciate?
I think the most fun thing, and some of it's driven out of the rising cost, is the multi-generational improvements that go into some of these houses. People are really thinking about, where, if my mom and dad need someplace at the appropriate time in their lives to come back, do I have a place that I can put them where they have their own bathroom, maybe even a little kitchenette? How do my adult kids come home and be comfortable? And so that's really fun to see. And our builders that are designing homes every day are really taking that into account. And that's,
Now I have to be nice to my child so I have a place to live in the future. When I lived in Italy, everyone was like that. You lived in a palazzo and each level was a different member of the family. But that is a good point. It just shows what a good human you are, that's your favorite thing. And thank you to Hunt Midwest for what you guys are doing.
And I like how that's the motivation to be nice to your child.
He said I could live in the basement. That's what he told me.
Well, hey, you know what? There's a lot of nice basements out there, Jen. But, we've spent, this time talking with Brenner Holland about some of the questions that Jen and I have, simply because we're curious people and there's always much more to learn. But we also want to know what you, the listener, wants to learn from these conversations. So I'd invite you to submit your questions to be answered on this podcast in future episodes by going to kchba.org/podcast. Drop us a note about some interesting things that you want to hear about and delved into a little bit more. And we're going to put more resources on the website for the Home Builders Association at kchba.org. And we're just going to keep delving into these topics. We are not absent material or content to talk about these things because these are complex things. And we just really appreciate Brenner Holland with Hunt Midwest for taking the time to come visit with us about a very complex topic in a very short period of time. So thank you, Brenner.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. Good to see you, Jen.